Hello everybody, today I'm going to be doing a new album review. This time I'm going to be reviewing the new Idols album, Ultramano. Idols is a UK-based punk band which kind of had it's their third album. They had two previous albums which kind of shook the punk community quite a bit, got a good amount of attention, and especially their second one, Joy, got a lot of praise from critics and fans alike. So going into a third album with two albums that are pretty well liked under their belt, a lot of people were really anticipating this. What is it going to be? Are they going to change it up? Which direction are they going? A bit of background for me, I discovered Idols quite a bit after the release of their previous two albums, somewhere in between that and Ultramano. Especially when I was digging into trying to find newer punk bands. And one of the ones I stumbled across I reviewed earlier this year, The Chats, which I really liked their album High Risk Behavior. Now, going into this album, I kind of was expecting something a little bit more non-traditional in terms of punk. Idols have always incorporated a bit of a modern flair to the traditional punk sound, whereas The Chats and a lot of other modern punk bands still are really in that era. That doesn't mean Chats are bad. I love that album, but it just kind of reminds me of a new version of the old Sex Pistols style sound. Idols here really does take a much newer and a much more different approach at the music. It still has that UK punk vibe, but that good modernness to it. A good production. Let me get into the track list. The album opens up with War, which actually, oddly enough, gives me a little bit of metal vibes. I don't know if that's just me or if that's a common thing people feel, but it's a pretty good opener to an album that is very aggressive, very in-your-face, much like a lot of their music, but almost a little bit more here. And perhaps the next song, Grounds, is one of the best ones on here. It incorporates some great electronic elements into it, as well as some experimental elements, which is something I love hearing from punk-rooted bands. A lot of times they feel limited to their genre, but Idols on the song Grounds does seem to experiment a little more with that building up atmosphere and a lot of stuff like that. And overall, I gotta say that song, along with most of this album, has some pretty good lyrics. Mr. Motivator, the following track, is really fun. It has a great chorus, great progression, overall a great track. And I like these songs because, well, I'm sure they have reason to be on here. In many ways, they do kind of feel like a mood lifter. Not that the album is down or anything like that. It's not a downer album. But a lot of the music is very social. There's a lot of social commentary on this album. So when you get a fun song like Mr. Motivator, which, like I said, I'm sure has social meaning, is kind of a nice refresher. Overall, though, I think that these first few tracks definitely illustrate how this album has some great production, especially for a punk band who, a lot of times it's a fine line between being so underproduced, so raw, to the point where it kills the music because it's taking away from the energy and the sound. Or on the flip side, you can get a band like a lot of the bigger pop punk bands out there who have way, way, way too polished production. Green Day, Blink-182, Sum 41, All Time Low. These bands all come to mind, and even the new Machine Gun Kelly album. They all come to mind as pop-punk albums that are way too polished. This falls somewhere in the middle. This is a really well-produced, really solid production on that end of things, while also still maintaining that raw, pure punk and aggressive energy that I enjoy from Idols and from punk music in general. This album rides that fine line, but never really crosses anything, bad. So for the most part, I was very satisfied with the production. I actually really did enjoy also how they did bring some of those bit more experimental bits from the guitar tones and all that. The song Kill Them With Kindness is a great example of them experimenting a little bit. I wasn't as crazy about this track. It starts off with piano and then kind of transitions into a bit more average, punky sounding song. Probably one of the more average songs on this album. But for the most part, I thought it was a good song. And I really did like the way they kind of, decided to change things up a little by adding a piano intro. Just little things like that. The song Model Village as well. is a great display of their lyrical abilities here. Some great social commentary written in a way that feels urgent but not pretentious, and that is very important, and sometimes it can be difficult for punk bands to do. It's another thing where there's a fine line between being urgent and encouraging people and encouraging your beliefs and views on the world versus sounding pretentious. And idols on Ultramono, especially on Model Village, definitely don't come across as really that pretentious. They come across as, very conscious. And I enjoy the delivery on the song, such as Model Village, criticizing a lot of the social issues and cultural trends. The next few tracks, give or take, but I think it starts to pick up again on the song Rains, which has some great chugging bass throughout. I gotta give the bass player credit for that one. And some great guitars as well. And just overall, another great example of their great attention to detail, of bringing more odd, unusual sounds that you don't usually hear in punk, from keyboard little bitties to a lot of interesting guitar tones, a lot of interesting guitar, background noises to build atmosphere with some great attention to detail. Gotta give them credit there. And then we move on to perhaps my favorite track on the entire album, Ahem. Great atmosphere, great dreamy atmosphere in the beginning. And even once that intro passes, you get this great ethereal guitar tone with some great guitar chords being played. Overall, it's just an excellent song. It's one of the slowest, probably the slowest song on this album. It is not a ballad, though. It's more so a very gothic, dark song, which I quite enjoy. Ahem is probably their best song in my opinion. I know that's just my personal opinion. Great tune. I kind of love how they decided to add that towards the end of the album to kind of spice things up right when you kind of thought you knew what you were getting into. They kind of throw this curveball at you, which I thought was excellent. And the song ends with Dank, which I thought was a fine track. Although the one main thing that stuck out to me the most was just the great drumming and musicianship. And that is one of the few final things I'm going to point out about the greatness of the musicianship on here. Everybody seems to be on top of their game here. Great musicianship all around. Between the vocals, between the writing, between the drumming and the guitars. Especially the guitars, A lot of times in punk music, guitar players feel limited. But not these guys. Idols really does push the boundaries for what guitarists can do in punk, especially nowadays. And any major criticisms here, I would say there is good commentary. However, I do think there needs to be a bit more variety on both a lyrical and a musical standpoint. Not that what they were doing was bad. In fact, they executed what they did very well. I just would have liked there to be a bit more variety other than a few tracks here and there. For the most part, though, I feel like it was a solid punk album. I think it is the most solid album in their discography up to this point. And I was left very satisfied. But yeah, like a lot of punk music, I always tend to have a bit of issues when it comes down to the variety between tracks. And while there was a good variety on this album, I just personally wish there was a bit more. But at the end of the day, this album was very solid. And I have settled on giving this album a solid 8 out of 10. Anybody that knows or doesn't know my reviews knows anything above a 5 is good, anything below is bad. So an 8 out of 10 is a pretty good review. I was left enjoying this album. I look forward to see what Idols does in the future. They're definitely kind of one of the main frontrunners of punk in the modern age. That's it for now. 8 out of 10, Idols, Ultramono.